Hello, everyone. My name is Pierre-Georges Van Wolleghem. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Bergen and scientific executive coordinator in research project PROTECT. The research I'm presenting today aims to explain variation in refugee recognition rates and places particular emphasis on the role of refugee status determination architectures. This is a research in progress that is part of the larger work package number 3. Now, for this presentation, I would like to start with a quote from prominent sociologist Douglas Massey, which reads, "Unlike birth and death, mobility is a phenomenon that is chiefly social. Defining a movement requires a line be drawn and an agreement be reached on the fact that it has been crossed. When the line is geographically and administratively drawn, is essentially a social and political construction." In the context of this study, this is to say that one is not a refugee per se because of individual features, but rather one becomes a refugee through a process that lies with the legal and administrative machinery of the state. Such machinery converts a wide range of asylum applications, a diversity of individual situations into a binary outcome. Either protection is granted or it is not. The idea of this research is to try and look into this black box that legal and administrative machinery is and find out how the processes through which asylum applications are examined affects recognition rates. So this presentation is divided into several sections. The first one looks at what kind of variation we are trying to explain. The second one outlines briefly our research question. We also go through the explanations that have been advanced in literature. We then present our hypothesis and our explanatory model. And finally, I will go through some preliminary analysis and results that we've reached so far. So first thing first, what kind of variation are we talking about? There is great variation over time, as is obvious from the graph you see here, which ranges from 2000 to 2018. You see that it goes up and down as time passes. There is great variation in terms of countries of origin. Here we have represented just some of the possible countries, but you see that there is quite a bit of variation between those countries. But more interestingly for us, there is a lot of variation between countries of asylum. Here on the graph on the right-hand side, you have the mean recognition rate among EU 28 member states. And the shaded area represents the standard deviation. So how much dispersion around the mean you have from one state to the other. So in summary, there is quite some variation in time and space in terms of recognition rates. And said variation has serious implications, which puts into question the ability of the international protection regime to protect those in need. So the question we're asking in this research is why such a variation in recognition rates? Why is it that applicants with similar characteristics have different chances to be granted protection if they apply in one country or another? So a number of hypotheses have been put to the test in the literature. Some of these hypotheses have looked into migration-related explanations, such as the share of foreign population or the number of asylum claims. The same studies have also looked into economics explanations, such as unemployment, GDP, growth, or inequalities. Yet other studies have looked into the effect of politics, whether public attitudes, both for the far right or government preferences, have an effect on recognition rates. Surprisingly, though, very little attention has been given to refugee status determination features, RSD for short. This doesn't mean that there hasn't been any studies on refugee status determination features, but those studies are mostly ethnographic or legal and do not therefore explain variation between countries, which is the goal of our study, of our research. There have been a few comparative studies on the effect of RSD on recognition protection statuses. We have on the one hand, Hamlin in 2014, who compared 3 different RSD regimes in Australia, Canada, and the US, and found that insulation and independence of administrative agencies from political interference led to more stable and potentially higher recognition rates. Another study from which we're going to draw mostly is that of Sishakan from 2008, who compared a larger set of countries and their refugee status determination norms, let's say, in law. And Sishakan finds evidence of the effect of RSD institutional architectures on recognition rates. So what is it that we're looking at in this study? First, we're looking at the convention studies, the studies that flows from the Geneva Convention of 1951. We also look at other statuses that could be subsidiary protection, for instance, in EU member states, but also humanitarian protection statuses, which depend on national legal frameworks mostly. And we also look at the overall recognition rate, so all statuses considered together. So what explains those different recognition rates? Of course, we're going to include the economic factors as a possible explanation, the sending country factors, so the situation in countries of origin, the political factors, but to that, we're adding the RSD institutional architectures. So what do we mean by refugee status determination architecture? We mean everything that relates to the normal asylum procedure. And here we look at the governance structure, legal and interpretation, for instance, whether refugees have an asylum seekers have an appeal right, whether such appeal is suspensive, and other kinds of information. To the normal asylum procedure, we have to add the access to normal asylum procedure, which also affects possibly recognition rates. And here we look at grounds for inadmissibility of asylum claims, decision-making processes, whether asylum seekers have a right to challenge such a decision, and so on. So those are two of the spheres we're looking at as possible explanations for recognition rates. But to this, we have to add other spheres, which are, for instance, detention procedures, which may impact both normal asylum procedure and access to normal asylum procedure, and therefore recognition rates. But we also have to add to that the rights of refugees and other protected people. And here we mean, for instance, the length of residence permit, family reunification, language tuition, access to social benefits and education. All those features that may have an effect once the asylum seeker is recognized as a refugee, and which may upstream modify the willingness of a state, let's say, to grant refugee status. So we're currently in the process of collecting all that data. The data is distributed on 4 dimensions, as I outlined. So detention, admissibility, normal procedure, and rights, to which we add vulnerabilities. We place a lot of emphasis on governance structures. We cover 15 European states, plus Canada and South Africa, and we cover about 20 years from 2000 to 2020. So resultantly, that's about 1,500 variables to code and aggregate for quantitative comparative study of the effect of RSD on recognition rates. As I said, it's currently a work in progress. We're still collecting the data at the moment, but we already have some preliminary analysis and results on macro factors explaining recognition rates. And here, we're looking mostly at the development of the administration, how strong, how developed the administration is, and how this may impact refugee recognition rates. We look at the administration as being embedded into a larger political and economic context. We consider the experience that the administration may have in asylum matters through exposure to asylum in previous years. And we look at the effect that politics may have on administration when it comes to deciding asylum claims. And this is mostly because administration and politics are driven by 2 different logics of action. The administration's logic of action is mostly, arguably, fulfillment of tasks, legality, and legitimacy, whereas that of politics is winning elections and generating majority for coalitions and government. So what we have done so far is to look at the effect of a more developed administration, which we call administrative capacity, and experience through exposure on recognition rates. And we also look at the effect that government's position on migration has on recognition rates. So we've also placed some technical information about variables, controls, and model at the bottom of the screen if you want to take a closer look at it. So in just a few words, what we've found so far is that administrative capacity and exposure have a combined effect on refugee recognition rates. For instance, at high levels of exposure, recognition rate increases as administrative capacity increases. But at low exposure, recognition rate decreases as administrative capacity increases. So that's quite an interesting result that we have to look more into, obviously. So those are very preliminary results. So another preliminary results that we've had is that government position on migration has an effect on recognition rates, but that effect is mitigated by administrative capacity. Namely, the effect of government position on refugee recognition rates decreases with higher levels of administrative capacity, and even turns out to be not statistically significant anymore when administrative capacity reaches its highest levels. So those are very preliminary results that we are going to look at in the light of the data we've collected on refugee status determination architectures, and then present everything in a series of papers that are going to be published, hopefully. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, I'm very happy to try and answer them. Thank you very much.